It's been a busy 12 months or so in the world of buckies. The big news, of course, was the release of the new Hilux. The less big news was the updating of the Ford Ranger. Here at RPM, we've pitted a Volkswagen Amarok against the Ranger Wildtrak, and we've added an Isuzu KB to our long-term test fleet. And while all of that's been going on, far out of left field, Fiat have released the Fullback. Now, before you start thinking that Fiat is a rank outsider when it comes to hard-working cars and off-road vehicles, it's important to remember that they do have a commercial division brand. We haven't had too much to do with it, but they do make a range of delivery-type vans. As for off-road, well, their Panda Climbing has a 4x4 drivetrain. Although, to be fair, if you're going to be driving on some challenging ground or carrying a heavy load, chances are you're not going to rely on the Panda. And that, Fiat says, is where the Fullback comes in. It's a family of tough workhorses that can carry a heavy load and packs real off-road ability. The Fullback range is made up of 3 models, a 2.4-litre petrol, a 110-kilowatt 2.5 diesel, both rear-wheel drive, and our test car, the flagship 131-kilowatt 400-newton-meter 2.5 diesel. Its part-time all-wheel drive traction with low range is delivered through a 5-speed manual gearbox. We've parked ourselves at Protea Eco Adventures to see how well it does in the dirt. But before we start there, we have to have a go on tar, which is probably where most Fullbacks will spend their lives and where it actually feels quite good. It's got a nice gear shift, nicely weighted steering. The ride setup is a little bit on the hard side, not quite as hard as an Isuzu KB, but also not as good as a Volkswagen Amarok or the new Toyota Hilux. As for the power delivery, well, it's good once you get going. But to get there, you first have to endure a bit of a laggy setup where it feels like the turbo only really kicks in at around 2,500 RPM. The torque peak is at a relatively high 2,000 RPM, which is later than the Hilux, the Ranger or the Amarok, and does raise some concerns about the off-road drive where low-down power is important. To be fair though, those concerns are raised even before you start driving. One thing any 4x4 worth its dirt needs is a tough image, and while the Fullback generally looks good, there are a few details that put some doubts in your mind. They have to do with the add-ons, specifically the way they're attached to the body. The side step has a rather flimsy looking bracket, and the nudge bar looks as though it might bend at the mere mention of being nudged. True, they are add-ons, so you could opt to go without them, and you probably should, because the impression would be much stronger without them. Like its competition, the Fullback takes a styling approach that is, well, stylish rather than being out-and-out utilitarian. The window line that tapers towards the back, the chrome mirror caps, the bonnet line and daytime running lights, and the rear light detail are just some ideas that help give this bucky an attractive look. The 17-inch alloy wheels look particularly good with their General Grabber AT tyres. It's got a very well sorted interior too, clean layout, decent spec and good space. The touchscreen infotainment system looks a bit aftermarket, but it works well enough, and there are some nice touches, gloss black plastic and really comfortable front seats. The top of the range model has everything you see here as standard, except the voice command button, which just kills the audio and doesn't actually take any voice commands. In terms of comfort and usability, the Fullback is right up there with the competition, and in some cases, it's better. For example, there's nothing else at the price that includes climate control and leather and park distance control in the price. All of which is very nice, but it'll come to nothing if the Fullback can't keep up when it's off-road. The specs say it should be pretty good. For example, all of this car's clearances are either the same or in some cases better than the competition, except the ground clearance, which at 205mm is a little bit low. But the 4x4 drivetrain feels solid. It's pretty much conquered this off-road course without even breaking a sweat. Although, it has to be said, with a little bit more low-down torque, it would be just that bit better. The Fullback does without electronics like hill descent control, and those aforementioned flimsy-looking add-on bits do sit in the back of your mind. But taking on some pretty challenging obstacles, the Fullback felt like it would certainly be able to cope with the kinds of terrain that its owners would subject it to. I say that because anyone who's likely to take on serious off-road expeditions is unlikely to do so in a Fiat. They would opt for the more traditional vehicle choices. Competent as it may be though, there is one major flaw with the Fullback. And it has nothing to do with the way it looks or something you might experience in the drive. It has to do with its comparatively high price tag. 468,000 Rand might include cruise control and Bluetooth, but ask yourself this question. If you were in the market for an everyday bakkie that doubled as a proper 4x4, would you go for the lesser known option with more toys? Or would you spend slightly less money on lower spec and something with a much better reputation, like the Toyota Hilux or the Ford Ranger? The turbo diesel unit in the Fullback is decent once it's up to speed, but it can feel laggy on pull-off. The rest of the setup, including the steering and gearbox, is easy around town and off-road. There's no doubt it's a competent package, good looks, a well-sorted interior with a decent drive and off-road ability. But it lacks the pedigree of the South African favourites, and its bigger price tag won't help its cause.